Kevin leads SEO as director at Shopify and is the creator of the Growth Memo newsletter, which is awesome, by the way. Previously, he ran SEO at G2 and Atlassian and worked with companies like eBay, Eventbrite, Samsung, Pinterest, and many others. I don't know these.
Small, very small companies.
Just so small companies. Okay, Kevin, I think without further ado.
Cool. Let's do this. I just share my screen. Mara, when you can see my screen, can you give me a little heads up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Cool. Thank you. Just want to make sure I'm good here. And of course, you know, I'm sure everybody heard and saw that unfortunately Hamlet Batista passed away, and I want to take the time to pay him tribute and you know, call out what a good person he was. I first met Hamlet and I think it was 2018 at Tech SEO booth in Boston, and I had this like really nice encounter with him, right? Like I went to the bar. It was like this get together of all the speakers the night before the conference. Went to the bar and ordered a drink, and he stood right next to me and he just started a conversation, right? And it was just a very, very nice guy, like a very gentle and kind guy. And so I didn't even intend to, but we got into this conversation about entities and how it might influence SEO, and we just got like lost in the conversation. And he just struck me as a very open-minded person and very, very down to earth, not arrogant in any way, but also incredibly sharp. So yeah, we had a couple of good memories ever since. I wouldn't say I was, you know, Hamlet's closest friend, but I was lucky to experience him a couple of times, and he always left a big impression on me. So yeah, rest in peace, Hamlet, and I hope that Hamlet's family is will be taken care of in the future. With that being said, I think one of the best kind of ways to pay him tribute is to keep his craft alive in his words. And you just saw a fantastic presentation about Python, which is not my forte, but Hamlet did a fantastic job in bringing that closer to the SEO community. But one of my fortes is experience with user-generated content, or UGC. And that's what I really want to talk about, because it's a topic that's a bit underserved in the SEO community, but there are lots of different sites out there for which it's actually very relevant. There are tons of UGC platforms. Some of them are communities like GitHub. Some of them are review sites like Yelp or G2. Some of them are publishing platforms like Medium. Some of them are social networks like all the ones that you see here. And then there are also some marketplaces where UGC in some form and shape comes to like Spotify in a sense, right? Like artists are also users on this platform. And so for SEOs, there's a unique set of challenges that we have to face and problems that we have to solve for. I was very lucky in my career to have gotten a lot of exposure to user-generated platforms. First, Dailymotion, a video platform and YouTube competitor, or former YouTube competitor. Then Atlassian, which has tons of properties that are user-generated driven or user-driven. And then there's also G2, where I worked before I joined Shopify. And of course, G2 is a big review site, and reviews are also UGC. So I learned a lot from each of these companies, and each of these companies put me in front of a different set of problems. And so I want to take ample time to go through these problems and explain a little bit my history with them. At Dailymotion, again, it's a huge site. It still today has over 100 million index pages. And back then, I think we might have been at 200 or 250 million. And I was there in very early January until mid 2017. Early January 2015 until mid 2017. And as you see, it was a pretty tumultuous time. Actually, just when I joined, Dailymotion got hit with a penalty, which I'll explain in depth, and then also what we did to get out of that penalty and turn this around and increase traffic again. Then there's, of course, also Atlassian. And I mentioned Atlassian has a lot of properties that are UGC-driven. They have a marketplace, a community, but then there are also public instances of Trello, Jira, and Bitbucket. So lots of sites, lots of different challenges. And I joined in mid-2017. And as you can see, we grew traffic pretty nicely over that period that I was there. And I will, of course, explain how we did that. And then lastly, there's G2. I would say it's not as big as Dailymotion, but still a relatively large site. And also there, we were lucky to drive quite a lot of traffic in the time that I was there. So I already mentioned the unique challenges of UGC on SEO, but every challenge also comes with benefit. So to quickly run through the pros and cons, right? UGC platforms are very scalable. You don't have to create the content yourself. But that also means that you are at the risk of spam, right? Or if you don't create the content yourself, you have to moderate it. You also don't have barely any content cost, but again, it can also lead to duplicate or thin content. It's much easier to generate backlinks for multiple reasons, but it's much more attractive to link to UGC sites. It's less of a sell, but therefore you have way more technical SEO challenges. And as a result, you can grow faster, but it can also be harder to control the platform. You have much better access to data because most of your data is user-driven, so you don't have to build it all yourself, but you need moderation. And you can get a nice flywheel effect going if the UGC platform is very engaging, but that needs a harder upfront effort. And so I talked about core challenges for UGC, and there are 4 main challenges that will provide the structure of my deck, and I will zoom in on each and every one of them. The first one, of course, is indexing and crawling. Whenever you have a large site, you need to make sure that Google can find all the content and you don't waste any of Google's crawl resources. Then there's content quality, of course. I already mentioned that when you don't create the content yourself, you can scale faster, but you need to put some moderation and filters in place to make sure that content quality across the board stays as high as possible. And there's, of course, a lot of potential for schema. Generating rich snippets with UGC actually works really, really well. And I'm going to show a couple of examples. And then lastly, as I already mentioned, there's spam. Spam is something that is a big challenge with UGC platforms, and much larger than you would have with any other sort of website, because it's often related to user-generated spam. And then I'll show a couple of examples of what that could look like as well. So first, indexing and crawling. There are a couple of levers that we SEOs have to control and optimize for indexing and crawling. There's internal linking, there is rendering, meaning you want to make sure that Google can not just render your site 100%, but also render it fast. Then of course there's site speed, and there are things like XML sitemaps or maybe even HTML sitemaps that help Google crawl through your site more efficiently. And so the first example that I want to show is the click curve of Dailymotion. It's very tricky when you have a platform like that, where people can just simply upload content to flatten your click curve, or your click depth, better said. What it basically means is how many clicks does it take from the homepage to get to all the other sites or the other pages on your site. And as you can see here in blue, this is the click depth that we had before we added tags to our pages, and in the orange you see the click depth with tags. And so generally you want to make sure that you have fewer clicks from the homepage to your deepest content in your site architecture. And so one of the challenges that we saw here by adding tags to video pages, and tags is very similar to YouTube hashtags, by the way, which I'll cover in a second. But tags basically help you to cluster content and group content, and for Google to faster crawl through your site. And so as you can see here in orange, you have a longer tail, which is not optimal, but you also have more pages on the second and third level. So that's something where we dug deeper into and understood, okay, how can we get even more pages to these to a click depth of 1, 2, or maybe 3. Very strong lever. And we also saw a similar issue at Trello. So Trello, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Trello, but here we saw an even steeper curve where the majority of content, over 50%, had a click depth higher than 10. And that was a huge issue because after a certain while, Google just doesn't follow the thread anymore, and you run into severe crawl issues. One way to solve this problem is to build more category and hub pages. They help you structure content and also are entrance points for search engines to discover more content that might be a bit further hidden away. Another lever are paginations, and paginations have the unique challenge that they're often structured in a way where you have the first 5 pages, and then you have an ellipse, and then maybe page 99, right? So you have the first 5 pages and then links to the last page, but there's this huge corpus of pages in the middle that you also want to make accessible. And it probably takes its own presentation of how to optimize for pagination, but it's very similar, or it's a bigger issue when you cover UGC platforms. And so when we played around with strong tags, which basically are very similar to YouTube hashtags or video tags, we went really in depth with our analysis, and that really helped us to optimize the site when we relaunched it, which is where the traffic uptick came from that you saw in the graph at the very beginning. But we basically looked at the outlink distribution and link distribution of pages with tags compared to pages without tags. And so the outlink distribution basically is a approximation of chi-rank, and I'll explain that in a second. But what it basically means is how many outgoing links do pages with a tag have versus those without. And so what you can already see is that there is a much larger number of pages with 1 to 100 outgoing internal links when they have tags, which makes perfect sense, right? You add a tag to the page, and the tag is basically an internal link. So that is something that we wanted. And in terms of index distribution, we face the same situation, right? We have more pages that get internal links after adding strong tags tags compared to pages without tags. And that's exactly what we wanted. We just wanted to link pages better internally. And as I mentioned, YouTube is doing the same thing. They just very recently launched hashtag pages, which are really interesting. And they're basically feeds of videos with the same hashtag. This is a screenshot of the hashtag entrepreneur feed. And as you can see, all the videos are related and relevant to the topic of entrepreneurship. And that's something that helps Google better understand YouTube or better crawl through YouTube. And YouTube already is one of the largest sites on the web, so it's going to be very interesting to see how that makes a change. I think that's going to probably be the biggest internal linking case study that's out there, at least the largest site. Another really important thing when it comes to crawling is site speed. Site speed, and especially server response time, is something that Google will factor in when they crawl your site. And the lighter your site is, the faster and more often Google will come to crawl it. At Dailymotion, we did face a challenge like that as well. We saw that the majority of our pages had a loading time higher than 1.5 seconds. And so this is something that we also optimized for. When you ask yourself what is too slow, of course there's always a spectrum, but to give a couple of hard numbers here. First, input delay. That's a very good number to look at when it comes to crawl optimization, just like time to first byte. And so when you use an audit tool like Lighthouse, they will often mark pages as slow when they're slower than 300 milliseconds. And then there's also a very simple red, green, and yellow score for time to first byte. So I would urge you to use Lighthouse, assess your site, and go beyond core web vitals. There is a difference between core web vitals and time to first byte. Even though it might be factored into core web vitals, you want to look at it separately. But also make sure that you avoid 500 errors. 500 errors are a very strong signal for Google to tone down their crawl budget, because for Googlebot it's an indication that the server might not be able to handle the crawl load. So you want to minimize those as well. And then there's this concept of Tipper that I developed at Atlassian. It stands for True Internal PageRank. And in fact, I first presented it in 2018 at Tech SEO Boost, where I met Hamlet. And I also have a screenshot of Arnold in that deck. So it's kind of coming full circle here to the intro. But I wrote a lengthy blog article that explains the concept. You can find that on my personal site, kevin-indig.com. But in a nutshell, what we did is we applied this concept to the Atlassian marketplace in late January 2017, and increased organic traffic by over 60% over the following months. And so you see that nice traffic curve going up and to the right here. And I want to take a little moment to explain what we did there, because it's very relevant for UGC platforms. So it all started with these two power law curves. And so a power law is an uneven distribution, if you will, or a non-linear distribution. And so Tipper what got me inspired to Tipper were two power curves. The first one is a distribution of domain popularity, which in a nutshell just says how many URLs on the Atlassian marketplace got how many backlinks. And as you can see, the absolute vast majority of URLs on that marketplace got maybe one or two backlinks, right? And the minority, this long tail here, is where you see that there might be a couple of URLs that got quite a lot of backlinks. So the link equity or PageRank is unevenly distributed. And at the same time, we see the same phenomena, the same distribution for crawl rate distribution, or for crawl rate in general. And what that means is that Google crawls a couple of pages way more often than others. And that for us was a major optimization potential. We thought that if we can flatten this curve a bit more, no pun intended, then we might be able to get more pages to rank. And so when we go a bit kind of deeper, here we see distribution of incoming versus outgoing internal links. And we see the same phenomena here, that there is a certain number of URLs that has a lot of outlinks, and then there's a number of URLs that doesn't have a lot of outlinks, and the same with inlinks, right? The majority of URLs have, the minority of URLs has quite a lot of incoming links, but not a lot of outgoing links. And so we wanted to equalize that. We wanted to democratize link equity throughout the marketplace more. And what we figured out after we dove into examples is that the problem was caused by version history pages of our marketplace apps. This is a Gantt chart app, and as you can see, it has quite a lot of versions, and all these versions link to their own unique page. And that creates a vast bloated corpus of pages on the marketplace that eats up and wastes a lot of Google's crawl budget. Here's an excerpt from Splunk, where we monitored our server log files, and we saw the same phenomena where these version pages just ate up a lot of crawl budget. And after a while, Google would just stop crawling these version pages. And what we did is, first of all, we kind of took out the links to their own separate pages on these version pages, and we brought them all to the same page. And that in itself cut down a lot of redundant pages from the marketplace, but it also made better use of Google's crawl budget. And that's what we were rewarded with. So you can see that there was a little dip in traffic initially because we took some of the pages down, but after that, traffic jumped up to a level where it stands until today. And so there's a more in-depth explanation of Tipper. Again, it's his own kind of slide deck. But if you're curious, you can read about this blog article. Also has the video from Tech SEO Boost on it. The next thing, content quality, super, super important, right? We have a couple of things that we can do here. There's consolidating content, making sure that content is correctly canonicalized. We can control what's being indexed. We can incentivize and guide users how to create more high quality content, but then there's also the aspect of content moderation. And so the problem of SEO debt is very real. You probably all heard of technical debt. There's also a concept of management debt. And it basically means that you sometimes sacrifice long-term sustainability for short-term gains. In some cases, perfectly fine to do that, right? But in other cases, it comes back to haunt you. And what that means is that in SEO, if you don't take care of your SEO hygiene, you wake up one morning and you have 180,000 server errors and almost 10 million not found pages. And that is a big issue because Google then has to sort out what the good and bad content is. Some of these server error pages or not found pages are externally linked, meaning they got backlinks. And so they just waste Google's time in a nutshell. And they will, quote unquote, punish you for that. Not in the sense of a penalty, but they will just not crawl your site as often as they maybe should. And so you need to have a constant handle on SEO hygiene. You need to stay on top of it all the time. And what that means is that if you have old or closed user accounts, immediately give them a 410 status code. You also need to have a system in place for old content and outdated content, right? You want to replace duplicate pages with tag pages. So what I mean here specifically is that sometimes when you have a user forum or a community, people will ask the same question a lot of times. And so one system to solve this problem is to say, okay, if a question has been opened or asked more than 3 times, we will de-index all of the question threads and instead we'll create a tag page that lists all these questions and rank that tag page. You also need to avoid server errors. It's absolutely crucial. Server errors are the death of crawl budget, and you want to refresh and send XML sitemaps often. Especially when you have a site that is larger than 1 million indexed pages, XML sitemaps need to be running smoothly, you need to be updated very quickly, they need to be very clean, right? You don't want to have any redirects or 404 errors or 410 errors in your XML sitemaps, which is a challenge for the site architecture and for the backend. So you need to work on minimizing the time of when a URL, which is in a sitemap, is updated when it changes its status code. This is what an example looks like. Some of the outdated or deleted content, we just simply gave a 403 status code to, and then automatically redirected people to the homepage. That is not a good idea. There are much better ways to solve for this problem. One of them is to just create something like a folder that you exclude in robots.txt. But even better is a 410 status code, very similar to an e-commerce. When a product is phased out and you don't serve it anymore, just give it a 410. You also want to have a plan for that content, as I already mentioned. And sorry, this was supposed to be 410, not 401. There are other ways as well, where if you can, for example, redirect people to similar content, especially on a UGC platform. Sometimes there is a duplication, and so very sophisticated platforms build systems in place that automatically redirect users to very similar or the same content if they encounter a piece of content that is not available anymore. And then again, I mentioned that server outages are terrible for crawl budget, so you want to do your best to avoid these. You want to assess your database connections and make sure that this is connected smoothly to the front end. Check your CDN connections and hub points, and then also invest in server load balancing to not encounter these bottlenecks. Very, very detrimental to crawl budget. I also mentioned that duplicate content is a huge issue. And so at Atlassian, we had a community before we had the official community, which was called answers.atlassian.com. And then at some point we realized that we want to take this to the next level and we needed a very vibrant community. And so the business invested a lot of money and a dedicated team into creating community.atlassian.com. And within this migration was one of the biggest migrations I ever did. We fixed a lot of these content issues. And one of the biggest one was duplicate content. You can see here that so these are the page levels and the URLs that are either unique, duplicate, or paginated. And you can see that the deeper you go into answers.atlassian.com, the more duplicate content you would encounter. And that's a very, very classic symptom of platforms that are not moderated and where duplicate content has not been solved. And so we removed a lot of DC when we migrated from answers.com to, from answers.atlassian.com to community.atlassian.com. And we were rewarded very quickly when we launched this. So this was, again, back in 2017. But you see that we get a very, very quick rise here in SEO visibility. And we also saw that same rise in organic traffic. And it was in part because we had a clean migration, but even more so, we fixed a lot of the SEO hygiene and duplicate content issues that we had seen before. A very good way to solve content quality issues is to incentivize content with engagement. And what I mean here is that at G2, for example, as you see on the left side, this is the G2 grid, which basically shows the category leaders, contenders, niche players, and high performers in a software category, right? G2 is a B2B software marketplace, and this is the e-commerce platform category. And the algorithm has a couple of factors, but the biggest ones are the number of reviews and the rating. So how well is a software application rated? And the number of reviews and the ratings is a good engagement signal, right? It basically means that the more you can incentivize users to post reviews, the higher the quality of your content. And so this is some sort of like a content quality flywheel, which is also followed by lots of other platforms, right? This is Product Hunt on the right side, where they rank products based on the upvotes. YouTube is a kind of search engine hybrid that also works with engagement signals, where the click-through rate and the watch time are very important. And so engagement solves for a lot of spam issues. It's not completely spam-proof, but it's much more spam-proof than other content quality signals. And so whenever you can, I urge you to rank content and sort content by things like votes, clicks, comments, and other engagement signals. Much, much better. And with that, I want to leave you with the last question for this section, which is there a way that you can create a content quality score for your UGC platform? I did that a couple of times, and there are several ways to go about it. It's very unique to your own business and to the type of UGC that you have. So when you think about something like Medium, for example, also very, very sensitive to engagement, things like claps or maybe scroll depth or maybe time on site are really good ways to rank and sort content, especially when you encounter duplicate content. Let's talk about rich snippets. Super powerful and have become more powerful lately, especially when we talk about FAQ schema. But there, of course, is also review schema and then Q&A schema. And there are probably even more ways to create rich snippets. And because you have a very scalable content lever with UGC platforms, you really want to spend some time thinking about how to optimize your snippets and how to optimize for click-through rate. Two examples from G2. The first one is, of course, review rich snippets. Absolutely no-brainer. We, in January 2021, had over 1.6 million monthly sessions from review rich snippets. And then, but also FAQ schema was something that worked really well. We got a little bit less traffic, but when you see the growth curve, you'll notice that this was a very fruitful lever. FAQ snippets draw a ton of attention. I know that initially there was a big fear that FAQ snippets might give away too much and would disincentivize users to click through to your website, to which I basically would argue that if that's the case, then it wasn't a very valuable session in the first place. But either way, they draw a lot of attention and they push other results further down. Here you see G2's #1 ranking for CRM software with a nice FAQ snippet down here. That worked really, really well. And then I also already mentioned review snippets, but in the review space, review snippets are merely a standard or a requirement. You can see that other sites have review snippets as well. So you don't just have to ask yourself, what rich snippets can I generate to get a competitive advantage, but also what is the kind of minimum requirement for rich snippets? What are the ones that other players also have that I need to have? So once again, you can learn a lot here from the search results themselves. And there are many good tools out there that help you monitor what different types of rich snippets are on the search results. I already showed SEMrush, which has a really good SERP feature filter, and I can strongly urge you to look at your site and look at all the different SERP features or rich snippets that pop up on SERPs that you rank on, but where you don't have the rich snippet yourself. That can be a really good inspiration. And so another question back to you, what kind of rich snippets can you generate? What do you have the potential to? And where can you maybe stretch your content a little bit to generate more rich snippets? Next, I want to talk about spam. Spam is something that we in SEO mostly encounter when it comes to link spam, but there are real UGC spam penalties and filters out there. And so if your site becomes a cesspool for spam, Google will devalue your website, right? Spam is one of the biggest threats and enemies to Google. And it is very hard to get rid of and very hard to fight. In fact, most of the web actually consists of spam, believe it or not. The levers that we have here is, of course, blocklisting, de-indexing spam, but also content moderation, right? I mentioned the many upsides of UGC, but there are also many downsides. And so this is an excerpt of Dailymotion and some of the spammy keywords that the platform ranked for. And I'm not going to read them all to you, but I'm sure you have this will give you an idea of all the different spam keywords that the platform brought to light. And so it just simply comes with the territory, right? There's this kind of internet law coined by yours truly, which is that whenever people will have the opportunities to spam, they will spam, right? It's almost unavoidable. And so you need to stay on top of it. You need to put mechanisms in place that diminish and disincentivize spammers. Even Google is not immune to spam. This is a screenshot from Google Docs where you can download all sorts of videos for free. So even for them, this is the point I want to make, not to call Google out, but to show that it is a very difficult problem. There's no perfect solution, but if you ignore the problem, it will grow. And so neither, even at G2, where every single review is vetted by a human, we saw some issues with spam, where a vendor called QuickMove tried to, or renamed their profile to CRM Software in order to rank higher for CRM Software. Very creative, so whenever people, I wouldn't necessarily call this hardcore spam. It's probably more to get an advantage, but people, whenever there's ranking, whenever there's incentive and something to win, people will try to get an advantage. And so what we did what happened at Dailymotion, better said, is that in 2015, traffic all of a sudden dropped by over 25%. I had pretty much just started at the company, and the Google Phantom Update 3 hit us and punished us for low quality content. And that was very fair. For a long time, the platform was unmoderated and we didn't take care of spam enough. And so what we did is we put a couple of mechanisms in place to get rid of, or at least to diminish spam, right? First of all, we blocklisted the worst terms and items. So there are just, some terms related to the adult industry and related to free downloads that you can blocklist 100% with 0% false positives, right? This is just stuff that you don't want on your platform, and there's no gray zone. The gray zone is what makes spam really difficult, but there is certainly, that gray turns into black at some point, and that's the stuff where you should start, right? Like get rid of the worst offenders. But then from there, we also used SEO tools and rank tools to look out for spammy keywords that Dailymotion would all of a sudden start ranking for. And then we systematically cut them down. We had a large block list that we in part manually and in part automated groomed over time and we barely got any false positives. It can happen here and there, but you know, if you have good user engagement on a platform and you take someone's content down by mistake, they will notify you, and then you can first of all put that content back in place, but also train your algorithms and train your in a nutshell your block lists to not take that content down. We also invested some time into blocklisting certain IP clusters that consistently posted spam. So in your server log files or in your backends, you will see where spam is being posted from. And you can, if you have repeat offenders, right? Say if the same IP posts spam 5 or 10 times in a row, you just blocklist them. And so this is a very clear signal to spammers to make it harder, not impossible, right? But harder for them to post spam on your platform. We had a very similar situation at Atlassian where spammers created accounts on public instances to do the same thing, right? Offer public downloads and all sorts of other spammy stuff. And so as you can see here in this graph, at some point, we just simply took them down, right? This was in November 2017, right? We had done some analysis beforehand. We identified the toxic IP clusters and then just killed them all overnight. And then you see that there was another attempt a couple months later, but then we struck them down again. And ever since it was pretty quiet because spammers realized that the effort to spam is just way too high to be profitable for them. So there is a sweet spot where you can disincentivize spam and get very close to 0%, but you'll never completely diminish it. And as you can see in this year-over-year traffic chart, that really paid off, right? That was very, very fruitful for us and for the company. And so to wrap that up real quick and bring it back home, you want to solve the 4 core challenges that UGC SEO comes with: indexing and crawling, content quality, schema, and spam. And if I had to digest that down into 8 different tips, right? You want to ensure efficient crawling and indexing, which is very measurable in the server log files. You want to help Google find all the content with HTML sitemaps, XML sitemaps, and internal linking. You want to update XML sitemaps often, and you want to slice them by your taxonomy, right? So by either topic or by site section. You also want to assess how Google renders your website and especially your mobile site, which pretty soon will come down on the SEO industry, and we'll see how well that works when Google moves to mobile first or mobile only indexing. But in a nutshell, you want to assess the render path that Google takes on your site. You also want to develop a content quality score, which doesn't have to be super sophisticated, but can grow more sophisticated over time. You certainly want to take care of old, duplicate, and thin content. You want to spread schema wherever you can. Honestly, with UGC, I don't think you can really go overboard there. And you want to proactively kill spam and disincentivize spammers. And with that, I think I got through a little faster than I wanted to, but I'm more than happy to take any questions from the audience. Thank you so much for your attention.
Awesome, Kevin, as expected. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting. I think we even have the first question. Do you want to answer?
Absolutely. Let's quickly stop sharing my screen.
Okay. So Danny Evans asks, if you had a website that wants to add UGC that doesn't already have the type of scale that G2, Atlassian, Dailymotion already had, how would you think about launching UGC from scratch as part of a growth strategy?
Oh yeah, I like that question. Thank you for asking, Danny. So generally, you have to think about the business model and what the kind of type of platform is that you are, right? Is it a community or a forum? Is it a publisher platform? Or is it something else, maybe something like a marketplace, right? And so the most important part about UGC, first of all, is to engage people to post more content, right? Like you have to get this flywheel started where in the example of G2, right, the user comes to the site to read reviews, and then at some point they post reviews themselves. or they come to GitHub to check out some repos, and then after a while they create their own. So the biggest question is, what is the incentive for people to create content on your platform? That is the first step. Then the second step is to understand how you can make it easier for people to create platform, right? So you want to dissect all the different steps that it takes to create platform until it's live, to create content until it's live. And then at that point, once you got that flywheel going, once you have some content generation going on your platform, then you want to think a bit more about moderation and putting the right guidelines in place. But if you're too aggressive in setting guardrails in the beginning, you disincentivize people to create content, right? Another consideration that you as an SEO want to take is to think about the taxonomy. What is the structure of content on your platform? In the example of G2, it is software categories like CRM software or marketing automation. These are categories. And then in the instance of Trello, it is a much flatter architecture, right? At Trello, you can basically create a board for anything. And we saw that some very interesting boards got organic traffic, because they start ranking in Google. An example would be boards for recipes from famous chefs, or software development roadmaps from big companies. I remember that Roblox had their roadmap publicly on Trello, and they're now a huge company, very successful. And that's something that started to rank in organic search. So you have to think about the use cases, where, like, first of all, how content is structured, and second of all, what type of content can rank in organic search. And you can model that out in theory, right? You can think about, like, what type of content can people create on my platform, and how would that be relevant in an SEO context. And then you want to make sure that people have the means to create something that fits a user intent on Google, right? Something that's worth ranking. And then from there, you can dive into all the technical problems that I spoke about. But the biggest point in the beginning is to really just get the flywheel going.